church language, like you can know I used to call it Sunday school answer syndrome, where you just hear these words and they just don't really, I just know that's Bible words. That's just church words, okay? But covenant is obviously an important concept, important word that's in the scriptures. And so for the next 3 teachings, we're going to look at some of the covenants. The covenants that are made. Some of the main 3. There's more than 3 in the scripture. There, like for example, God makes a covenant with Noah. We're not going to look at that in detail because it's pretty, it's pretty straightforward as far as he's not going to flood the earth again. But some of these other covenants are going to be significant pieces of what God has, how he's defined his storyline of the gospel. And this is huge. And there's so much I want to talk about this first one. The first one that we're going to talk about is Abraham. What I did, guys, is I put together. So what happened is I was making out the notes, and as I was writing out the notes, I started doodling on the side. Is it we have any doodlers in the house? Yeah. We're the type that people are like, you're not paying attention, you're doodling. It's like, no, this is helping me pay attention. And so I was always doodling in school. Anyway, so I started doodling when I was doing the notes, and I was like, why don't I just make this into the notes? So we're going to try it, okay? And so what I'm going to do is it's going to play a time lapse of some of the drawing, and I'm going to talk about the covenant with Abraham. You guys ready? Are you ready? All right, let's do it. There's no music or anything with it. That would have been cool, so you have some funky beats playing. But Richie's going to beatbox. Okay, no, you can play the first one, and I'll just tell you when to play the next one. The background of the story. So, after the flood, God said to fill the earth, but instead mankind came together and they built this tower named AKA. And they're saying, what are they saying? We don't need you. And this guy's throwing up the fist. We don't need you, God. And then what happens at Babel? He mixed up their languages. Who said that? Yeah, good job. So yeah, he mixed up their languages because this is after the flood. All of mankind was told to spread out and fill the earth. What do? They come together and they say, "Let us cast off his restraints." Let's because remember we're going to back up a little bit to the story that, like what Richie had talked about last week. But we have to remember that this is the storyline that has been going on, and so they knew that there was this appointed seed that was going to come, and then God says to, he had just flooded the earth, and so he's saying like, hey, listen, like you guys need to obey me, and they say no, essentially, and so what you have going on here is that there's this rebellion against God. We don't want to wait for your promise. We don't want to listen to you, take orders from you. So they rebelled. Humanity rebelled, but God had That's good. That's your first fill in the blank. So meet Abram. His name gets changed to Abraham. God called Abraham to leave it all behind, all of the rebellion of Babylon, all of the shaking your fist at God, and he said, leave his family, his friends, and his hometown. And Abraham says, okay. And there he goes. So Abraham is called out from the nations. He's just this one random guy, this insignificant person, but God focuses on this one guy because he's gonna give him some very incredible and important promises for the future. That is gonna. And guys, we're not talking about these just nice, like a nice life. Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. But so here, you can go to the next slide before I get too far ahead of myself. I'll make you a great nation. I'll bless you. I'll make you a blessing to the entire earth. Genesis 12, 1 through 3. I'll make you into a great nation. Hold up. There's Abraham. Okay, let's define blessing. Is it just saying God bless you when somebody sneezes? It's kind of one of those words that just like blessing. What does that mean? It's so vague. God bless you. Good health, like it's so much more than just prosperity and protection in this age. Although it does include that. God did prosper Abraham. He protected him. And so I'm not saying it's not those things, but I'm saying there's a bigger storyline going on here. And so I said Abe's blessing involved a far greater scope. This word blessing is far greater than just your best life now, or I said your best life then. He talks about the seed. There's a promised land. There's descendants. There's a nation, and it's going to affect the entire earth here. So there's a bigger scope. So blessing is more than prosperity and protection. It does include that. When God does bless us, He does take care of us, our needs. He does protect us. But we also have to see the bigger story, and that's what Abraham is so critical to see what's going on here. You can go to the next one. Cool story, bro, but what does that matter to me? So, I'm glad you asked. So I'm going to talk about some of those things that were promised him, because so Genesis has these different times where God meets with Abraham, and he gives him these specific details. I mean, very detailed about his seed. So when you say seed, it really is the same thing for descendant, somebody who's coming down his family line. And do you guys remember another seed that was promised? Did you guys talk about the seed in Genesis 3? This is the seed to Eve. What did Eve get promised? Back there. Oh, there's a snake. Right, the snake will. Right, yeah, there you go. The snake will strike the heel, but wait. How's it go? Yeah, but he's gonna. But the seed of Eve is gonna crush the serpent's head, and so again, these are some of this thread. The Bible is telling this story. It's this, like, that's why we do the gospel timeline. It's unfolding. So it's like you plant the seed, like the seed goes into the ground, and it grows. A little tiny tendril comes up and then sprouts a leaf. And so this is how God's story is unfolding throughout the scriptures. There's a seed that's gonna come and crush the serpent's head. But when is that? That's when they're asking, where is that? When's this happening? How is it going to come? It wasn't Cain or Abel. So the story keeps going on, and then it comes to Abraham, and it says this seed is going to come through your line. This is what is going to be in their mind. They're familiar with these things. This is going to come through your line, the seed. Okay, so did you catch all that? I want you to remember these three things when you think about Abraham: the land, the seed, and the blessing. And they're connected because God these are three things. I wish we could take till 8 a.m. tomorrow and go through all these scriptures, because it's awesome to see what God promises to Abraham. But I'm going to sum it up in the land, the seed, and the blessing. Land, seed, blessing. There's the seed. He's cute. Blessing. Okay, ready? So the promise of the restoration would come through the woman in Genesis 3, the snake crusher. So this was promised in Genesis 3. And so this is the backstory to where we are with Abraham. And then Abraham is promised these three main things. The land. See, there's the promised land. This is a physical, geographical land in Israel. It's this big plot of land. Why is that significant to us? Like, why does that matter to Richard? Why does that matter to me or you or anybody? I mean, because this is a real location in history with boundaries, that because it's really going to happen, and there's really going to be a land that this promised snake crusher is going to come and live in and dwell in. And so it's not this I think it's not this like floaty, just random thing. It's very physical, and it's going to happen in the future. And so Abraham is promised this land. The crazy thing is that he didn't, when he heard these promises, we'll talk about this later. I'm getting ahead of myself again, but he didn't set up his home, build a mansion there. He actually lived in a tent. So we'll get to that. But so the seed, the promised seed, is also promised to Abraham. And this is going to result in the blessing. And the blessing is the reversal of the curse. So the ultimate blessing is the reversal of the curse. And remember blessing is one of those words that just is like, yeah, just blessed. God bless you. I'm blessed. How are you doing, brother? I'm blessed. And it's like, it just was one of those words when we just throw it out there, when we water it down, it loses some of the potency. I mean, when you think about that, really when you think about death, remember death played its part, and all of us have to, because of sin, all of us are going to die, and that's tragic, and that's terrible. The curse that we have to return, to the earth, to the dust. But the fact that there's a blessing that's going to come back out of the earth in resurrected bodies is a pretty big deal. And it's the ultimate blessing. And so this is all this story that they have in mind. The ultimate blessing is the reversal of the curse. And so here is God making a sacred agreement. So when you ask your parents, what's a covenant? You can know a sacred agreement. Words like agreement or deal or contract, they're kind of scratching the surface of what a covenant is. The closest thing we have because a covenant is, like I said before, it's one of those Bible words that just it doesn't relate to our daily lives. I'm not like, Richard, I'm going to make a covenant with you to go get me a drink of water. It's like, we don't ever use it, for my work, I'm like, I'll make a covenant with you that I will work on your house and build this something or other, and here's a covenant. No, we'll make like a contract, but the closest thing we have is marriage, like a marriage covenant, it's where people say like marriage covenant. So I know it's kind of funny, but when we go through these stories, these covenants with Abraham, we're going to talk about with Moses and with Israel, and then we're going to talk about David. I want you to picture almost like God saying, on the same gravity as marriage, that there's two parties involved, and it's this sacred, it has this significant weight to it. So, okay, there we go. We have Abe. See, there's Abe. He's pitching his tent, and in Hebrews it talks about how, he was. There's this awesome verse in Hebrews 10 where it says he's looking for the city whose builder and maker is God. Wait. This is Abraham, guys. This is Abraham had just been promised this land. He's in the land, and he's in a tent. Oh, we got the verse. That's awesome. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place where he would later receive his inheritance, and he went out without understanding where he was going. By faith, he lived as a foreigner in the promised land. He was in the promised land as though it were a foreign country, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, who are their fellow heirs of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with firm foundations, whose builder and architect is God. So he has this idea of what he's looking for. Just being in the land wasn't it. That wasn't, like I said, he didn't just build his house there, and he was looking for something, he had a bigger scope. He had a bigger idea of what God's promise was. And that's where we're talking about. So what would have been in his mind other than what had been promised already in the past, that there was going to be this coming day when death is no more. This is the storyline of Abraham, like I said, there's so much I really encourage you guys to dig into with Abraham. But what the main thing I want you to see is that this promise to Abraham and this covenant with Abraham is a huge covenant for you and I too. Can you pull up that verse, the Galatians one? It's Galatians 3:29. And if you are Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. Because one of the problems that I didn't really talk to you guys about was that this promise was given specifically for Abraham's physical descendants. You know, that is the Jewish people trace their lineage back to Abraham. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't have any. I'm not Jewish, and so I don't have any part in this promise. But what happened is when Jesus, he is Abraham's seed, he is the promised seed. What it talks about in Galatians is that when we're crucified with Christ, when we give our lives to Christ, and we no longer live for ourselves, or that we become a part of we become Abraham's heirs, and so heirs according to the promise, and by the Spirit that we get to partake in this promise. So that's what, when you're reading the New Testament, you're gonna find this talked about all the time about Abraham's promise, that it is a backdrop for our hope and for you and I, for what we're living for and what we are looking for. You guys have some questions? I did. I named one of my kids Abraham because Abraham is so cool. I mean, guys, he left it all behind. I mean, that whole thing about leaving behind your family and your friends and your hometown and following God's voice without knowing where you're going. That faith, it moved God's heart, to see that, and I was moved by that. But good memory. Does anybody have any other questions? There is a song. I actually have it about Abraham. Yeah. Right. That is a really good question. I'm so glad you asked that, because we're going to go into a lot of detail about that, because so Abraham had a son. Anybody remember his name? Isaac. Isaac had a son. There you go. Yep, Jacob. And Jacob's name got changed into Israel. And so this is going to be our next, so not next week, but the following, we're going to talk about the covenant with Israel, because what's amazing is God makes a covenant with an entire nation. With Abraham, it's with one guy. But with Israel, it's with an entire nation. So there's very important ways that this affects, salvation. And your question is really good to ask, because it's Daniel, right? Yeah. What Daniel was saying is, so is this promise? Because he was paying attention. I said it was for the physical descendants of Abraham. That's why, when Jesus is talking to the Pharisees and they say, well, we're sons of Abraham, because that's saying, well, we have part to play here, and it's also insinuating that there's other people who don't have any part in this. And so it's really important that, because remember, all the nations had rebelled against God, and they said, we don't want you. We don't, we're going to go our own way after our own gods. And so God calls one and he makes his own nation. He makes a special nation that's his own. And so what's incredible is that through this nation is going to bless all the nations, but it's going to come through this nation. So if you're following or if you're not following, we're going to talk about this in more detail at our next one. But I really like that question, Daniel. Oh, God, we thank you for your kindness and your faithfulness, just like you were faithful to Abraham, and that you were always with him, and that you you gave him the promise, and then you stuck with him even in his ups and downs. And I thank you that you stick with us. And I pray just for each one of us that we would be like Abraham. We would have the faith of Abraham that would take you at your word and leave it all behind. And that we would walk in those footsteps. Amen.